Hello! If this is the first video of mine that you are watching, welcome to my channel, but if it is not, welcome back. Today, as you can tell by the title, I am going to be talking about my most loathed tropes in literature, which is a tongue twister to try and say 5 times fast. But this might seem a little bit negative just because of the nature of speaking about tropes that I don't like. So if you would like to watch something a little bit more positive, I have filmed a video in which I talk about my most loved tropes, which I will link just up here or here. I don't know what side it actually comes up on. But if you want to hear about my top 5 favorite tropes, you can watch that video there. And then finally, as has become tradition with my videos in the distilled part of my name, I do have a cocktail to pair with today's video, which comes from this recipe book, which my beloved friend Becca gifted to me. And this is called the Revolving Door, which felt very appropriate seeing as I'm about to talk about tropes that I would like to see walk right back out the door. And this cocktail here has equal quantities of rye, fresh lemon juice, and maple syrup. So it also feels really Canadian. However, it then told me to garnish it with a cinnamon stick, which I'm a little bit dubious about. I can get behind the whiskey, the lemon, and the maple syrup, but the cinnamon stick is where I'm a little bit wary and a little bit intrigued, but I'm not sure how it's all going to taste together. So let's give this cocktail a try for the very first time. Cheers. That's actually really nice. It is predominantly, I don't taste much lemon juice. Mostly I get the whiskey right at the front. That's the first thing I taste. And then the maple syrup hits about halfway through, and then that is what lingers. I did get hit in the face with a cinnamon stick, but I don't taste the cinnamon at all. I mean, maybe by the end of this video when it sits in the drink for a little bit longer, I will. But no, for right now, I smell it a lot and it smells good, but yeah, it's predominantly just it is really sweet with that maple syrup, but that's predominantly what I'm tasting here. A little bit of the whiskey, but really just a sweet maple syrup alcoholic drink. So yeah, I guess those in the 20s, the 1920s, not the 2020s, kind of knew what they were doing. Okay, with the taste test out of the way, now let's dive into the tropes that I do not like. If you watched my other video, you will know that I talk about the tropes in descending order. So starting our list is number 5, and that is going to be an unreliable narrator. This one might be a little bit controversial because I do know people who adore an unreliable narrator. For me personally, I just find that it can be done poorly more often than I enjoy it in literature. I do have some examples in which I can get behind an unreliable narrator. I do think it can help you read the narrative a little bit closer and pay more attention to the text. But there is a very fine line between that occurring and it being a little bit of a cop-out to try and make an interesting plot move forward. So when an unreliable narrator is done not well, I find it to be just a little bit grating and a little bit boring, but when it is done well, I do tend to enjoy that. And one example in which I think an author did accomplish this and did manage to pull off the unreliable narrator is actually Caden from the Licanius trilogy, which I reviewed recently. And I think what made this unreliable narrator kind of work for me more than other examples is that the character is right there with the reader and trying to figure things out for himself and piece together the bits of information that he is acquiring at the same time as the reader. I don't think that's a spoiler for the book. there is a journey with Caden, but I really, really enjoyed being alongside the character for that journey. And I think that is why in this instance, an unreliable narrator worked for me, versus sometimes when you just have an unreliable narrator lying to other characters or lying as the narrator of the text, it just falls a little bit flat for me personally. I got wise, and I'm gonna hold on to the cinnamon stick from now on when I take a drink. My fourth most loathed trope is going to be miscommunication, and this is one that can make me want to tear my hair out, mostly because I find it so common, especially in romance books. So I think I encounter this trope the most because it is one that I can very often push through if I'm enjoying the rest of the text, but it is something that I find so grating because, you know, in real life, if you had these two characters sat in a room or interacting with one another, they would just communicate like normal human beings and they would resolve the issue, and suddenly you wouldn't have to be put through the misery of 200 pages. And I think one of the reasons why it is so common in romance novels is because it's a very easy way to add in the won't they in a will they, won't they romance. And an example of miscommunication as a plot device is actually Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, which is a book that I believe I rated 5 stars, if not 4 maybe. So it is a book that I really, really loved. However, a huge component of the romance and the relationship was propelled forward by miscommunication / lack of communication. So I find miscommunication as a plot device to just be so simple. If you can resolve the main conflict of your book by one character just simply talking to the other, I think there is room there to dig a little bit deeper and try to think of a different conflict to form the center of your novel. Next on my list as my third most loathed trope is going to be, and if you have watched any of my videos, this one will come as no surprise because I do talk about it fairly often, and that is, of course, love triangles. This is a trope that I just personally do not like and can't really stand. I don't think I have read a love triangle that I have enjoyed in any aspect since I was in like middle school, in my twilight days. I just think that there are so many more interesting ways that you can build up or tear down a relationship that falling back on a love triangle just feels a little bit boring and simple. It's just a little bit predictable. Again, it's that will they, won't they aspect of so many romance novels. A friend and I were actually talking recently about love triangles, and she brought up a way that they can almost kind of be flipped on their head, and I think if a love triangle was presented in this way, it is one that I could actually enjoy, and that is when it is an actual triangle. When you have your character A and your characters B and C, but there is a relationship that occurs between all 3 characters with one another. Whether it's romantic, platonic, or familial almost, that relationship goes in every direction rather than just 2 directions, which is so often the case that I at least have found when I've encountered love triangles in fiction. But in this case, where a love triangle is an actual triangle, I think a really important part that my friend mentioned is that you still have a platonic friendship that exists there and isn't torn down or thought to be lesser than the other relationship that develops. And I think this is just such an intriguing and really healthy way to present love triangles, because love can be messy, and I find this could just be my bias, but I find that I have seen love triangles more frequently in young adult fiction. And at that age, yes, love can be really, really messy. So I think presenting it in a healthier way is a way that I could enjoy love triangles. Unfortunately, this trope is still on the list because more often than not, the love triangles that I find in fiction aren't really those healthy depictions, and they're not proper triangles where you have a strong relationship between your characters B and C. So that is why love triangles is on this list, as you would have guessed if you have watched any of my other videos in which I have dunked on this trope quite a lot. We are coming up to the end here with my penultimate trope on this list, and coming in at number 2 is going to be character bashing, especially when it pertains to gender. Now, this does not mean when a character is actual trash and other characters call them out on it, because I love that shit. But this is when an author creates a character or multiple characters that exist almost exclusively just to be bashed or trash talked. Take, for example, love triangles. This really frequently happens when you have bad love triangles in books. And I just find it, again, simple and unnecessary, especially when it is like a woman bashing a woman or a man bashing a man to make himself seem better for a romantic interest. It's just so overdone, so unnecessary, and it's just kind of plain mean. I love nuanced characters with shades of gray, but I don't love characters that exist almost exclusively just to be trash talked. A specific example of this that I can think of is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. Now, this is a romance book which I didn't love. It is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and in this book you have Persephone who immediately gets this jealousy towards Hades' assistant named Ivy. It had something to do with a plant and greenery, that I know, but I forget the assistant's actual name, which just goes to show that she didn't have a fully fleshed character. She existed in that book just to spike Persephone's anxiety and jealousy, which they didn't communicate about, and create this faux love triangle that, again, they didn't communicate about. And there are valid reasons why those two could have had a really bad relationship. There are very bad things that happen between those characters, but just with no communication, the cattiness almost exclusively derived just on this unsaid jealousy because they were two women existing within the sphere of Hades. And I just found that to be so old. Again, there's so many more facets to a relationship that you can explore and expand upon when you're writing romance. So I really didn't like the bashing that happened between those two characters. It just felt very, very catty, and it served really no purpose for the plot. Would not recommend that book there. I have tried to be concise about my final trope so many times now. I get flustered with this one. No, not going into that kettle of fish. Now, finally, my number 1 most loathed trope in literature is actually a bit more of a serious one, and that is because it is when sexual assault or trauma is used as a plot device. When it is used as a plot device to further a secondary or tertiary character's development or arc, that is infuriating to me. But even when it is used to further the character's story or the development of a character to which that assault and trauma happens, personally, reading a book, there is often, like 9 times out of 10, a better way for that character to go through the growth that the author is trying to make them go through. without having them go through a really traumatic, sexually traumatic event in particular. And one of the reasons, a large reason why I think this is handled so poorly so frequently is because it's just kind of used as a little stopping point, a little hopping stone, I guess you could call it, in which the character has this event occur to them, but then in the next chapter, they're perfectly fine. And the author doesn't spend the time and take the time to really delve into the effects that a serious sexual trauma or sexual assault can have on a character and how those linger with someone. And part of the reason why this is so serious is because I do think there are real life consequences when you have sexual assault and sexual trauma treated so dismissively in literature. And I think we all know of a particular fantasy author who likes to just sprinkle that throughout their series. So this trope really, really grinds my gears. However, as we all know, there is an exception to every rule. So there is one book, and literally just one book that I can think of, and that is Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier, which is actually just over my shoulder here. You can kind of see it. So in this book, you have the main character who experiences a sexual trauma, but then Marillier doesn't jump straight past that and the character is fine and dandy. That sexual assault, that traumatic event really changes the main character, as tends to happen in real life. And Marillier takes the time to really demonstrate and show how that assault lingers with the character, how it changes, how they interact with the world. And it's a really heartbreaking, gut-wrenching depiction of sexual assault, but it's also one of the most realistic depictions that I've seen. And Daughter of the Forest is a fantasy book that was published in 1999. So Marillier showed even back then, and sadly it's still super relevant as a great example today of how you can include sexual assault in your book and make it a realistic depiction and not a harmful depiction. And the reason that this is number one on my list is because more often than not, I find that when sexual assault is used as a trope, it is a harmful depiction. So on that very heavy note, we have gone through the list of tropes that I loathe the most. Let me know down below if I mentioned a trope that you also hate, or if there's a trope I didn't mention that is your most loathed trope. Let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will be back very soon with a new one. Bye for now. And a little cameo to end the video of my cat, Spencer, who has just woken up and is absolutely ready to choose chaos. So on that note, bye!